Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us for today's session, the coming air raid on ICS and IIoT cybersecurity. IIoT World's ICS Cybersecurity Day is being recorded, so if you do not wish to have your participation recorded, we'd ask you to please log off now. And if you can, please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the tools where the Q&A is located in the chat box. And while you're looking at the chat box, if you could just drop us a quick note and let us know where you're joining us from, it'd be greatly appreciated. We always love to see what type of global penetration we have. Now, I do have several other housekeeping items that I want to address before we jump into our session. We have two additional upcoming events. On October 20th, we will be having real-time equipment health insights for data-driven maintenance strategy. And on December 8th, we will have our IIoT World's Digital Manufacturing Day. So make sure to mark your calendars and sign up for those sessions as well. We'll be running for 55 minutes this afternoon. And at the conclusion, we will post Q&A questions. And we'd ask you to send your questions in while we're going throughout the session. We're going to reserve a fair amount of time at the end to dive deeply into those. And today would not be made possible without this, the wonderful sponsorship from our sponsors. So a great big thank you to Siemens, Fortinet, TCG, Verve Industrial, Trend Micro, Adolis, Keyfactor, Schneider Electric, and Building Cybersecurity Organization. So for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, please allow me to tell you a little bit about IIoT World. IIoT World, the leading authority on industrial IoT, is a digital media outlet bringing the latest industrial Internet of Things, virtual conferences, and content to a global community of over 279,000 decision makers and influencers. IIoT World focuses on delivering daily intelligence on the industrial Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, predictive analytics, digital disruption, autonomous cars, cybersecurity, machine learning, and smart cities and infrastructure. Online, IIoT World curates a series of virtual events that punctuate the calendar and draw thousands of delegates, including IIoT World Days, the largest industrial IoT virtual event in the world. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. John Livingston. John is the CEO of Verve Industrial, and he'll be walking us through some of the forthcoming changes to the Internet of Things and industrial control system requirements. And we're going to delve a little bit into the concept of air raid. So without further ado, John, please, the floor is yours.
Terrific. Thanks so much. Appreciate being here, Greg and Lucian. First of all, just by way of introduction, I'm John Livingston. I'm the CEO of Verve. Verve has been in the business of industrial controls or OT cybersecurity for approximately 30 years. So we started back in 1993, 94 as a control systems integrator. So helping design industrial control systems, OT systems, the evolution of IIoT systems. And then about 15 years ago, began to help clients in the protection and cybersecurity of those systems. I personally joined Verve about 5 years ago. I spent about 20 years of my career with McKinsey & Company as a consultant, helping clients go through their digital transformation journeys, particularly around wireless technologies in both consumer and industrial applications. And I joined Verve specifically because of these growing threats to the industrial environments as we were starting to connect more and more devices in plant environments, in distributed environments like trains and buildings, et cetera. So what Verve does, as I mentioned, is we started as a control systems OT integrator. We have a platform called the Verve Security Center that helps our clients manage their overall OT security. And then we provide a range of cybersecurity services. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is based on real client experience and having to deal with many of these IIoT security challenges. So as we begin, sorry. Let me just make sure I can control the screen here. So the first question is, what is IIoT security? So how do we define this? Obviously, industrial Internet of Things or industrial operating technology. We think about this in a broad context, so not just the things that may be wirelessly connected, but the entire operating technology world that controls physical processes. So some I think Gartner now calls it cyber physical systems. And so this could include power generation, manufacturing, pipelines, building controls, as well as all those things that might be more thought of as quote unquote IoT, such as cameras and sensors. As we begin to this, as we think about why is this different? Why do we have a topic around IIoT security rather than just general IT security? The several reasons. Number one, the operating system devices, so the Windows, Unix, Linux type devices are running complex networked controls applications that have processes that can't be interrupted, right? So if we're running a manufacturing facility or a power plant, these processes running, the applications running on those operating system devices are critical. We tend not to think of those often as IIoT. We tend to think about the sensors, et cetera. But in fact, those operating system devices are critical to the overall IIoT operations. We then obviously have a lot of embedded devices, over 70% typically. We have limited staff, so there's a limitation of IT security staff. But when you come into OT security, it's incredibly more limited of people who have an integration of security and IIoT. Complex network architectures, and then taking many of the endpoint actions that we might take in IT sometimes are more limited in OT. Things like patching, things like hardening configs can be seen as sensitive given the operations of these environments. So there's a bunch of differences that happen in the IIoT environment that we need to consider as we think about how to secure it. And so, trying to make sure I can get to the next page here. Sorry, trying to move to the next page, but I can't seem to get there. There we go. So as we think about how this is going to evolve, we're seeing that what we call an air raid is happening and going to accelerate within the world of IIoT cybersecurity. And it comes down to these elements here highlighted across the acronym. So first on the A side, so there is a significant growth among hacking and attacking of these industrial controls or IIoT systems. No longer are these systems just the focus of nation states, but now the commercial attacking is growing, and that's going to change the volume of attacks, the type of attacks, et cetera. Number two, the presence of IT in this environment. So if you look 5 to 10 years ago, OT was really separated. And we're now at a point where IT is really becoming significant in the role of how do we secure these things. Third, on the regulation front, regulators are becoming more and more focused on this world of OT or IIoT. The new pipeline regulations from the TSA really, and those were recently announced, recently made more public through some documents released to the Washington Post and others. It's very clear that those are NERC light, meaning they are, NERC is the US power industry compliance regulations. And these pipeline regulations are starting to look very prescriptive, we'll call it. We're seeing this happen not just here in the United States, but also around the world, where various countries in South America are adopting these policies, various countries in the Middle East, et cetera. The fourth R is a resource constraint. So there has always been a resource constraint in the world of operating technology and manufacturing, et cetera. But what's happened is there's a big growth in the number of vulnerabilities and risks in these environments, therefore requiring more resource, but frankly, no more resource. In fact, probably continual reduction in resources of people who really know these systems as people retire, et cetera. There's significant alert fatigue. So a lot of what we're hearing is, yeah, I've put in these systems to give me some perimeter alerts, and it's just flooding us. And so that alert fatigue is getting worse and worse as more events happen. Another big driver of change is insurance and the insurers. So if you look now at the risk premiums of insurance, which are going up, cybersecurity insurance, which are hardening, so to speak, meaning that the prices are going up. One of the focus areas, particularly for manufacturers, is, oh, okay, I haven't really focused on all of this IIoT stuff before or industrial control system stuff before. I better start focusing on that. And that is raising a set of requirements that's new and different. And then finally, the D, the directors. More and more boards of directors are saying this is a priority, and they're starting to ask for measurable improvement in the OT security and the IIoT security, essentially asking it to look like IT cybersecurity. We've been doing that for 10 years. We need to achieve the same kind of results in IIoT security. So with that, what does that mean? Well, we've seen a significant increase over the last sort of 6 months or so of events that are impacting IIoT. So back to the point around attackers growing. You could have, as we've mapped here over time, you could literally call them out year by year of the major events. And over the last 6 to 9 months, we've seen dozens of events, significant events. And what that's evidence of is we're now starting to see a new emergence of focus where hackers have discovered that this is a very profitable thing to focus on. And so, in fact, industrial organizations really end up being in the crosshairs. So these are the numbers, the changes from 2019 to 2020, as evidenced through IBM's research, of the amount of attacks going on in different industries. And as you see, manufacturing and energy have jumped from 8th and 9th, respectively, to 2nd and 3rd. And so this is just another indicator that IIoT or OT or ICS, whatever you want to call this, is definitely right in the crosshairs of the attackers themselves. Oh, sorry, I think I went one page too many there. Sure, I can go backwards. Is there a way to, thank you. So what's then happened is, so every couple of years, SANS does a survey of the ICS or OT cybersecurity community. And what is shown here are the results from the last several years. And what you're seeing here is the tremendous increase in the perceived risk of ransomware. So as you see in here, from 2017 to 2019 to 2021, you see ransomware there on the left going from somewhere between 25 and 35% of people saying it's the greatest threat to now roughly 55% saying it's the greatest threat. And things like new devices being added to the network, or partners in supply chain, or internal or accidental threats on a percentage basis going down, and ransomware becoming the thing that most people are worried about. And this is just indicative of this shift from fears of a random device being connected to the network, or internal actors, to real recognition that there are these for-profit entities out there looking to cause disruption. And obviously, that then portrays into the percentage of people who believe that there are severe risks to those IoT or OT systems. So in short, the world of the attackers is growing for the IoT world. And so what's the CISO trying to do? What is our Chief Information Security Officer trying to do? They're trying to achieve the same security capabilities in IT, but tuned to the world of IoT. And so this is the IT organization, or the IT security organization is now entering the field of IoT, saying, I need to have the same capabilities. You need to be able to do things like patch management, configuration management, network configuration analysis, backup and restore, the same kinds of things that we get in IT security, we want to see on the OT side. And so what they're asking is, okay, do those same things, but in a way that's proven safe for these OT environments, without scanning them with traditional vulnerability analysis tools, which might trip plants or have a negative interaction with some of these embedded devices, providing coverage for many of those devices that aren't covered in traditional IT security. Having the ability to act in these environments, don't just detect things, but give me the ability to patch things and manage software, et cetera. Reducing labor requirements, et cetera. So the IT organization is becoming more and more involved in setting the direction. And so, this is the driver of this is because the IT IoT integration is critical, as the ransomware that people are worried about almost always 99% of the time is starting in the IT world and then bridging from IT to OT. And so what we see here is we've got OT specific ransomware, which is very, very minimal today. And that is starting, so the IT vulnerabilities or the IT ransomware starts in corporate and then bridges down into the operational environments. As a result of that, bringing IT and OT together to solve this problem is key. So that's on the, I call it the I, right? Or sorry, that first I, which is the IT becoming more involved. Now the R, right? The regulators. We're seeing a dramatic increase in the amount of regulation in the IIoT or OT security world. We're seeing it in the US Department of Defense with their implementation of CMMC, which has been delayed a little bit, but it is coming. NERC-CIP type approaches like in the US power industry have been extended into other geographies, whether it be even called NERC-CIP, as in countries like Chile, or very similar regulations as in Brazil. As I mentioned, the pipeline audits and greater compliance, a series of EU government directives, a variety of things in the Middle East driving this, et cetera. The reason for this is these externalities, right? Is that the governments are worried that if any individual gets targeted, it could have external impacts. And so regulators are starting to step into this space in a much greater way. And so what are we seeing? So we're seeing in that regulation a significant increase in audit requirements rather than just self-assessments. So the regulators are saying, look, it's not just enough to self-assess and say that you've done something. We are going to start to require you to have audits. They're starting to expand scope beyond the operations of that particular organization into the supply chain. They're expanding the breadth of controls and subcontrols. The TSA pipeline one is a very good example of how the breadth of controls has expanded and getting into the details that really look like IT security, but applied into OT. And then there's a variety of ICS or OT, IIoT specific standards like IEC 62443 that are becoming a foundation for some of the regulators as they go forward. So the short answer is, as we look forward, we are seeing a greater and greater role that the regulators will play in this. A lot of things we hear as we get into this, well, it's really difficult to do this. The systems are old. The vendors won't let us. OT resources just don't get security, et cetera. There are a lot of cultural differences in this journey that will have to be overcome if we're going to be able to achieve that. The other R is the resources. And so we all know resources are constrained in general, but what's happened is we've had this explosion and continuing explosion in the number of vulnerabilities in the world of IIoT. And what's happened, just if you look between 2019 and 2020, our analysis showed by the end of 2020, we had about a 30% increase in the number of advisories, but about a 50% increase in the number of vulnerabilities year over year. And those vulnerabilities every year are growing and growing, and someone has to evaluate some. Someone has to go into the environments to figure out how we're going to address these vulnerabilities. And we're at the tip of the iceberg, right? Because people are just starting to research these IIoT devices. We are going to find more and more of them. And so the air raid is really driving a new set of questions and requirements. So the questions that boards, insurance companies, et cetera, are asking is, what's the baseline security? How at risk are we in these IIoT, OT environments? Which systems are most critical to protect? Are we making progress? So, okay, where are we yesterday and where are we today? It's not enough just to say, I'm secure. No. I want to see how secure were we yesterday, how secure are we today, and how secure are we going to be in 6 months or whatever it is. And can we demonstrate that? Can we show an auditor? Can we show an insurance company? Can we show the board practical data that says we were red yesterday and we are green today, so to speak? Asking about recovery and how quickly we can recover in case of an event. So there's a variety of things that that are questions that are being asked. And therefore, if we're going to solve this, there is a new set of requirements. So how do we solve air raid? Well, we got to demonstrate progress. We have to be able to demonstrate risk reduction in a way that's more than just visibility. It's more than just, I know what I have, but I'm starting to get auditable results. And then I have to move from that alert fatigue that we talked about to accelerated response. So not just that I got a lot of alerts and yeah, it's good information, but what's the least disruptive response, or LDR, that I can take to any individual threat? So it's not just a matter of, okay, I've got a group in a SOC and they're detecting things and I'm alerting, but no, I need to know, okay, if this happens, these are the actions I can take to respond. And then finally, the implication of efficiency. There's no way we're going to solve this problem if we're solving it as a plant by plant or a building by building, or frankly, an OEM by OEM basis. We're going to have to solve this on an enterprise basis. And what we refer to is we have to think globally, meaning pull that data centrally, but act locally. We're going to talk more about that as we go here forward. So what can we do? What could a CISO do to achieve that IT-like security in OT or IIoT type environments? And so, number one, education awareness. So being able to educate, build alignment, et cetera, between the groups. Establishing a standard between OT security, for OT security, and develop a roadmap, and we'll talk more about that. Third is applying what we call OT systems management. So the active management of the OT type environment. Building new OT security skill sets, and we'll talk about what specific skill sets we think are most important. Number 5, this think global and act local idea. And then the bonus one, which would be fantastic, is bringing IT capabilities, but tuned to those OT requirements. And again, we say there's 5. Number 6 is kind of the bonus thing of, if we can get all this stuff to work together, that's the magic in all of this. So first, bringing IT and OT together. We're going to talk about this think global, act local a lot as we go through here today. But IT has a set of security capabilities that if we're going to get this done right, we want to leverage, right? They can establish those standards, right? They're experienced in analyzing vulnerabilities, analyzing risks, looking at threats globally. They're used to developing remediation strategies. So we can build centralized remediation strategies and consolidate those. While they may not know the details of operational processes, the SOC, the scalability of having a security operations center and analyzing that data, yes, we may need to add new indicators, et cetera, but having a strong central team of IT security personnel will be incredibly helpful. But having said that, we need to get OT or the IIoT team involved early on, because without it, we can cause significant damage to our operations if we're not thinking about the operational realities. So things like determining remediation feasibility. So for instance, can I patch that device? When can I patch it? If I patch it, what are the implications on other elements of my production that also have to be upgraded? What's the timing of taking actions? So I may need to only be able to do that. I may only be able to do that during an outage. Okay, so how do I schedule that? Supporting an incident response. So there will be a need for someone on site to be acting for incident response. And also recovering from incidents, et cetera. And so IT and OT can come together to refine the standards, right? It's not going to be just taking an off the shelf standard from IT and saying, yes, it works perfectly in OT. We need to find the exceptions, the technical feasibility exceptions, et cetera. We need to find the compensating controls that we'll agree to resolve those things. Coming together to create the right training and awareness of events so that the OT team can be aware of what to look for, et cetera. And so our strong view is, and we've got a variety of ways you can do this, but to bring IT and OT together early in the journey to create awareness and education of the need to work together. The second point we talk about is standards. And so again, from that SANS survey we talked about, these are the last few years of how the various organizations are adopting different security standards. NIST cybersecurity framework remains as the most popular standard in use. Many are combining these other standards. So they're combining a NIST CSF with IEC 62443, for instance, and they're leveraging particular elements of 62443 or other standards that are more IIoT focused with the NIST CSF. And so while we're not recommending one standard over another, the good news is there are standards that are very widely used that we can pick up on and that have had experiences that we can leverage in terms of learnings, et cetera. And so the first view in our mind is work on selecting a standard that works within the OT world and align on that as a team. So if we take NIST CSF as the most well used or popular, whatever you want to call it, version of those standards, say, okay, so what's included in there? And when we think about IIoT, we often find ourselves focused on that bottom piece of this circle or pie chart, which is the detect component. Not that it's not important. However, as we think about really addressing these security needs, we need to think about this holistically. And so it's going to require some active management, the ability to have, essentially management of these devices. So views of it. So number one, having a 360-degree view of your environment, of the risk in your environment, everything from users and accounts, software, standard secure configurations, backup status, et cetera. But then actually protecting these endpoints and networks. That includes things like patching them and updating them. It includes hardening configurations. It includes managing users on these devices. It includes anti-malware, application whitelisting, et cetera. And then finally, network segmentation and protection. Then obviously it will involve detection to monitor and manage those endpoints, monitor the endpoint performance of those devices. So having behavioral data about users, about device performance, monitoring traffic, obviously, and then detecting threats. That is only good if you can actually then take the response actions and know those least disruptive responses, eventually taking actions to secure them. And then finally being able to rapidly recover from any event that happens. So we think about this as a two-pronged thing, risk reduction and threat response. So in the risk reduction elements, it comes down to, what are the presence of the environmental factors that could create a chance of negative impact? And then we want to reduce those things. Then the threat response is identifying a threat. So what active behavior could cause a risk, and then responding to those in as rapid a fashion as we can by, again, taking actions to rapidly close the gap. And we'll talk more about how we can do that. But we want to emphasize this balance of risk reduction and threat response. It's not enough just to do a detection of an event. We have to think about reducing its risk and then responding to the threat once it's identified. So how do you get started on that journey? What's the process that we see people go through? So we tend to think about it, and we'll share these slides because it's a bit of an eye chart here on a chart like this, but basically assess, remediate, then monitor and improve. Most organizations, and again, this is layered against that NIST framework as a way of bracketing it, but there's an assessment phase, which is to get that real-time inventory, that view of the risks, and establish your policies and standards, et cetera, and then assess yourself against them so you know where your starting point is. Almost always, there is a remediation, kind of a catch-up phase, where once you go into these environments, we've got some pages on this to follow, you see these big gaps and that you can then start to close. And so there's this sort of gap closing period. And then finally, on an ongoing basis, as I said before, regulators, insurers, directors, et cetera, are asking us to be able to track and see how we're doing. We were green yesterday, we're going to be red. We're red yesterday, we're going to be green tomorrow. I think I've got some odd things going on the bottom of the screen here. Hold on a second. See if I can get rid of those. There we go. But monitor those and then improve over time. So ability to see how we're moving from red on a certain dimension to green over time. So what's our solution to doing this? We've mentioned several times OT systems management, and that's really our mantra here is if we're going to address IIoT security risks, we have to get into the world of systems management, meaning actively managing the security of these environments. And in our view, that incorporates several things. So it starts with having a robust view of your asset inventory, right? That is the cog that makes this machine work effectively. Without a really robust asset inventory, meaning I know every user and account, I know every piece of software, I know, every NIC in the devices, flows in the network. Without that, it's tough for me to really be able to do systems management. But with that, I then can see a series of applications around that asset inventory that allow me to do systems management. It starts with vulnerability management of CVEs and risks. It then thinks about patches. So a patch has been applied to address those. And how can I apply those patches? It looks at configuration settings and how secure are those configuration settings. It looks at users and accounts. Are we secure from an access point of view? Do we have dormant users in the environment? It looks at our malware status, our anti-malware status. Do we have anti-malware and is it up to date? Do we have application whitelisting? Is it in lockdown? That inventory and that tracking allows us then to do real-time monitoring of flows in the network, of end user behavior, of device behavior, of application behavior, which can allow us to identify and detect threats. And then finally, incident response, the ability to take action in the environment rapidly. That systems management concept really allows us to take that 360-degree view of these risks and to demonstrate action to reduce those risks. We're going to talk more as we go here about how we can make this kind of an OTSM process happen. It starts with deep endpoint visibility. You can't do this without having that depth of view of what's in your environment. Oftentimes we find as we help our clients, we'll look through the backplanes with the endpoint visibility that we have, and we see all sorts of things connected into those backplanes. Vendors love to put on IoT devices connected into the backplane of a PLC or a controller that's connected into your control system. And all of a sudden you've bridged, potentially unknowingly, out through some wireless network, cellular network, which you didn't even know was there. Anyway, so seeing through those, understanding those vulnerabilities, being able to have flexible design. One of the biggest challenges in IoT security is the complex networks that exist. And if we have to go try and put spans and taps everywhere in the environment, it becomes a very expensive process. And then that endpoint view allows you to get really deep, as shown on the right-hand side, that ability to build that central cog of the OTSM journey. So that central view, right, that ability to gather that endpoint view allows you to think about what we call a 360-degree risk of that asset, right? So it allows us to see vulnerabilities, patches, configurations, user and account, all those things I talked about before coming together into a score, right? I can start to score these assets and I can start to say, this one's more at risk than that one, et cetera, et cetera. And that is a very helpful thing when you've got literally millions of assets out there, or at least hundreds of thousands. And when you look at the vulnerabilities, you've got tens of thousands of vulnerabilities to address at any given time. Typical environment, right? So we'll go into a manufacturing plant on the right-hand side here, and it's kind of typical. This is our vulnerability dashboard. And I know it's a bit of an eye chart here too, but just to give you a sense, right? We'll find literally 15, 20,000 vulnerabilities. Now, okay, we can prioritize those by critical or high vulnerability, highly risky vulnerabilities, but still in one plant, right? You got 700 almost critical vulnerabilities to deal with. I have to find a way to look at the compensating controls I can take, because I'm probably not going to be able to go just fix those overnight. Understanding, most of these devices are left in insecure states. And so understanding what we can mitigate, what we can patch, what we can't patch because, we can't upgrade the entire control system, is critical, being able to prioritize the risks and our actions in that environment. Similarly, user access and control risks. Inevitably, we'll find, dozens, if not more, admin accounts that have expired passwords. We'll find inactive dormant accounts that are you wouldn't see them on the wire per se. They're not being used. However, they are huge risks as an attacker can get in and leverage those. We've got local users on accounts. And this is in large part due to the fact that IoT often isn't managed by Active Directory or other types of solutions. And so we find these risks that grow. And so again, we have to manage these devices. We have to get into the habit, like you would in IT, of doing essentially systems management. And the regulations are calling for this, right? So this is the CMMC standard, but if you look at the TSA pipeline standards, if you look at the Middle Eastern standards, et cetera, you find that you have to have, for instance, configuration management, right? Employing least function configurations, establishing and enforce secure configuration settings, applying deny by exception or blacklisting or whitelisting policies on your devices. And so the regulations are calling for us to have the ability to see and act to ensure that we're consistent in this. And as I said before, to be able to demonstrate that red to green improvement. This is an example of configuration checks, right? Where we can go in and look at the various secure configuration settings that you want to have in your devices. And you can look and see, okay, what are we doing well on? Where are we green? Okay, we're green on, the access credential manager is a trusted caller, should be set to none, to no one. Okay, great, we've got that one done. However, we've got, we're not doing well. So we got a bunch of red on configuration settings like accessing the computer from the network. And by going in at this level, we can start to say, okay, here's where I need to move from red to green to start to demonstrate greater levels of security. And this is just configuration. You could do it for users, you could do it for vulnerabilities, et cetera. But to be able to demonstrate that improvement over time in the management of these devices. And at the end of the day, we're going to try and comprehensively manage these IoT or OT endpoint risks, right? So shared passwords, dormant accounts, as I mentioned. We got a bunch of XP or Windows 7 devices that we have to find a way to secure. You can't just think about those embedded devices down at the bottom, but those Windows devices are the window into our world. We've got routers that'll have shared IP ranges. We've got dual home NICs where people have created 2 NICs, in part for logical, very good operational reasons, but that create insecurities. And so at every level of the environment, we need to think about addressing these risks in a consistent way for us to be able to really achieve the goal we want to achieve. And we also mentioned detection. This doesn't work without a really robust set of telemetry. Endpoint, network, process alarms. One of the great things about being in operational environments is we have physical processes. That's a great set of indicators that we can leverage when we want to go do threat hunting and anomaly detection work. But bringing all of this information together so we're not just reliant on one type of telemetry will be key to being able to identify the right response actions to take. And that's really what we're saying here is, so it's great to detect a threat. So we've got some network status, we establish a baseline, and we detect the threat behavior. They're up at 1 o'clock. Okay, I then can understand the context of that asset, what's going on. Or for instance, let's say it's a patch the hash attack that I see happening. Okay, which accounts are being impacted by that pass the hash? Then I can go find those accounts within my system. I can pivot to the assets that are most critical to me. I can analyze where that account exists so that where that attack might spread. And then I can say, okay, what's the least disruptive thing I can do to stop that attack? Well, okay, maybe I can just go eliminate that account on all these devices. Okay, great, let's go take that action. And let's see if we can remediate it. So often what happens we hear is our clients say, oh, well, we are compromised by one or two of these various malware. So we need to stop everything, and clean up all the systems that are. And by the way, that may be absolutely the most appropriate action. But the ability to go deeper to say, what is the least disruptive thing I can do right now to stop that action will be key to being able to get buy-in on the OT side to the actions we need to take from a security. And so we mentioned this idea of think global, act local. So what we mean by that is the ability to take this data we've just talked about, right? The asset inventory, the vulnerability data, the patch data, the user data, the telemetry, et cetera, pull that up centrally. So I've got, let's say 600 sites. I got 10,000 sites all over the world, whatever it is. I want to get all that data up into a central place. I don't want it to be broken down by, okay, here's my Honeywell data, here's my Emerson data, here's my Siemens. No. I need all of that data in one platform because it's the only way I'll be able to manage this risk over time. So centralize the data for prioritization, for playbooks, for prioritization of controls, et cetera. Many organizations we're seeing then are creating a regional subject matter expert role, particularly global organizations, who will provide essentially a floating expertise among industrial facilities around the world. But then, okay, now I need to go actually take an action. I need to be able to patch that system, or in the case of a threat, I want to be able to remove those accounts or whatever. I need OT involved in that. I need to make sure that what I'm doing is not going to disrupt the plant, unless obviously it's absolutely necessary to stop a threat. The only way to stop it would be to disrupt operations. But even then, I want to make sure the way I do it is a very safe way, that I don't blow up the plant in the process. And so the actions then happen locally. And that's a key part of getting that bridge between security on one hand and safety, resiliency on the other. The ability to centralize and drive efficiency, which saves about 70% of the cost, but ensure local control over the actions. And so to do that, our view is you got to take that, what we call OTSM platform or OT systems management platform, and you got to tie it into your IT systems management or IT security management. And the two have to work together. It's not enough just to say, oh, great, I'm going to push out a bunch of data into the IT systems. Our strong view is you got to bring data in first. So for instance, your firewall data, your antivirus data, your backup data, we want to pull that into the OTSM information so that we know, okay, do you have a backup for that device? Do you have antivirus up to date on that device? But then once we have that, we then want to export that out for visibility to enterprise IT tools so that they can possibly see threats that might be moving across the IoT IT boundary. And then as we think about this OT systems management, we then have to build the skills for this. There are almost 500,000 positions, and this is just the US, almost 500,000 positions in the CyberSeek database that are open right now. And what's interesting about this is while we tend to focus on machine learning, AI, advanced analytics, anomaly detection, all of which are important, don't get me wrong. But almost 80% of the tasks then we think of cybersecurity are systems administration tasks or systems management. They're patch management, configuration management, vulnerability management, whitelisting management, network architecture, device provisioning. They are things that are fundamentally systems management tasks. We need to find a way to build those systems management type capabilities in the OT or IIoT world. It's going to be different, right? We're not saying, oh yeah, great, we'll take a Windows admin and throw them over into OT. Not what we're saying at all. The point is, there is a set of tasks that are things like configuration management that we need to adapt, right? 80% of our jobs is going to be figuring out a way to manage these devices. And so that's going to take a different type of configuration management capability, a different type of thinking about network device management. However, we have to build, in our view, we have to build those skills on the OT side as we have them on the IT, not to say they're exactly a match, right? We have to edit them and evolve them, but we're going to have to build them on the IIoT or OT side. And so how can this address these challenges of the air raid, right? So we think about there's sort of 6 ways that this can help. Number one, it can help because it enables that complete asset view for better risk management, right? By being able to really think about that systems management, getting down to each and every asset, we can put that 360-degree risk score and know how to do risk management. Number two, it can provide us protection, not just detection. Our strong view is you can't just detect things. We have to have a protection and a response mindset as well. And this kind of a systems management where we're bringing this information together allows us to do that. Number three, improving the detection. So getting that detection from a broad set of telemetry allows us to improve the types of detections that we have and accelerate our incident timelines. Number four, it allows us to do targeted response. So by having that full systems management view first, I can know what I can do. But then secondly, by having the ability to take actions in an automated way, obviously through the OT team, we then can have a way to take a targeted, rapid response action, which is key. Next, it's scalable. So this kind of an approach allows us to do that think global, act local, right? Pull up that data and drive a 70% reduction in the operation, in the efficiency. And then finally, OT safe. So the idea that we can take that data and think globally, but before those actions are taken, they're taken with an OT mindset, meaning they go through the filter of people who understand the process before the final action is taken. And you can outsource parts of this, which is the other helpful thing. You can go into the OT or ICS world and you can bring in experts who have that knowledge because you've centralized some of this data. It becomes scalable enough. So these are the 6 things that we think are the benefits of going at this air raid problem with an OT systems management approach. And so that ends my formal comments. I understand there's a number of questions in here, and I guess, Greg, you'll probably walk us through some of those questions.
Absolutely. We've had a great response. So thanks for everyone for joining into the conversation. And we've got about a little over 5 minutes remaining now. So we're going to push through as many of these as we can to do them justice. And obviously we're not going to get to all of them, but we will circle back with some kind of a document or an outreach from IoT over the world with responses to the balance of them. So without further ado, let's dive into some of these, John. You probably got a session rating box popping up here as well. So please, if you could do that, we greatly appreciated. Hajir he's got a series of questions. I'm going to try and paraphrase this, John. He says, many industrial systems were not designed with cybersecurity in mind. They were meant to be used in the closed network days, pre-internet. that kind of a mindset. So as you're shifted, or we're seeing this massive shift towards more of an open network,
Yep.
a lot of vulnerabilities that are coming out. I think you've touched on some of these. I guess his question at a high level is, how do we treat the multiple component variabilities when you have a facility like this that just is an open exposure from a lot of point sources?
Yeah. So I think the question, how do we treat all of these types of vulnerabilities that now exist in these open networks, I think is the question. And I think our answer would be, you can't just treat the, I guess, all of those vulnerabilities in the same way, right? So there will be some vulnerabilities which we can address through, I'll call it traditional vulnerability management approaches, whether that be patching, whether that be hardening of configurations as recommended by the vendor. Some of those things will be very doable. Some of those vulnerabilities are only fully remediatable, so to speak, with an upgrade to the device, to the piece of hardware. Well, that may be very difficult in most environments for a cost point of reason, or frankly, from an operational reason. And so we're going to have to find alternative ways of protecting those environments where we have critical vulnerabilities. And then lastly, there may be vulnerabilities which are just, there is no response, meaning the vendor hasn't released an answer to how they're going to deal with that vulnerability. Our view is that let's obviously patch the things we can patch, et cetera. But by having that, what we call that 360-degree view, which includes your compensating controls on that asset, we can look to say, all right, there are a bunch of embedded vulnerabilities on that device, but I have several protection layers above that device. I have, let's say it's connected into a network device. Great, that network device has security layers on it. It's behind a firewall. That firewall is well configured. Any workstation that communicates with that device has application whitelisting, has been patched, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we need to think of is not just that device as a standalone device, because we will not be able to solve every vulnerability, but that device in its system, and what are the compensating controls I'm putting around that device to protect it. That's our view of the way we'll be able to address these risks.
No, that makes sense. Appreciate that point. Hopefully that addressed your question. Let's jump to one from Edward's got several in here, John. He's talking about the CMMC. I think you touched on this several times, but maybe if we can just elaborate.
Sure. CMMC is the government's maturity model. Sorry, the U.S. Let me be very clear. The United States Department of Defense procurement policies around their cybersecurity maturity model. That were written and originally put in place, I'm going to get the exact date wrong, sometime last year. They have been continually slightly delayed given COVID and changes of administrations, et cetera. But what they are calling for essentially is the entire DoD supply chain to have a set of maturity standards. And there's various levels that different vendors will have to achieve depending on the information that they are touching. It's all information based right now, meaning it's protecting critical information, non-confidential, or sorry, Anyway, but it's basically all information. It's not process. It's not protecting the process itself. And so can CMMC help? It can absolutely help drive change in the supply chain, no question. It will force change in the supply chain. However, it needs a lot of help from industry to get there. A standard is great, but without these small and medium manufacturers being able to get the help they need to reach those standards, it's going to be very challenging. And so obviously regulation in some ways helps because it drives behavioral change, but it doesn't solve the end problem. Sooner or later, a customer or a user or a company has to make these changes, and they're going to need help in that process, I think.
Oh, that makes sense. I think we've got time for one more, and I'm going to piggyback something on top of this too. This is from Gopala. He said, I hope I pronounced your name right, Gopala. How soon can we expect the adaptability of ISO IEC 30147 for 2021? And then my piggyback to that is, when we live in a world of conformity assessment, whether it's voluntary or demanded, and you have a regulatory body, then you have standards development organizations, they're historically moving at a slower pace. Have you seen any initiatives or any thoughts on how do you accelerate that to deal with products like that we're talking about here and services that are just advancing at a rapid rate?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think where we are is that we tend to react after the fact. I mean, look at the TSA pipeline regulations. If you look pre-Colonial Pipeline, literally there were 9 people in the entire TSA that were supposed to be working on physical and cybersecurity for the entire pipeline system in the United States. And now all of a sudden we have this new regulation. Why? Because of Colonial Pipeline. My somewhat cynical view is that unfortunately it takes events like that. And then the problem is, okay, great. I've now at least got a regulation in place, but am I going to hold people accountable to that? What's the timing of the accountability of that regulation to happen? And obviously there's another side of this coin which says regulation causes, it's a problem because it pulls the money away from people who were going to do cybersecurity. Yes, but we're at a point where we need to raise the level of the ocean kind of thing, right? And raise the overall level of security. And yes, there will be some people who are way out in front who now have to waste some money that they wouldn't have had to waste before. But anyway, my view is, unfortunately, I think we're going to wait to see actual attacks before these things are adopted. The good news is that because things like IEC, ISA, et cetera, are out in front, we have something to draw on quickly when we have a problem, right? So we can go. And so if you're somebody on this call, you're probably actually already thinking about this. That's great. So go to those standards because they're there. They're very, they may not be perfect, but they give you a direction to go to rather than, wandering around trying to figure out where should I begin.
You have a starting point. That makes a lot of sense.
Exactly right.
Fantastic conversation, fantastic dialogue, and great engagement. Some great questions coming in from you folks. But that's leading us to the end of our session. So, John, thank you for sharing your experience, your knowledge, your tremendous insights. A lot of positive comments in the comment section here, and thank you again to our sponsors: Siemens, Fortinet, TCG, Verve Industrial, Trend Micro, Adolis, Key Factor, Schneider Electric, and Building Cybersecurity Organization. Great, fantastic session. And thanks to our attendees for listening and for all your inquisitive and thought-provoking comments. So with about 2 to 3 minutes left, it's time to move into our next session here at ICS Cybersecurity Day. That will be the intersection of AI and industrial control systems, cybersecurity best practices. So once again, thank you for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day here.
Thank you all. Have a good day.